What remained required a long time to comprehend, and in some ways has never been fully comprehended. Of the approximately 330,000 German and Axis troops who had been encircled in the Kessel, only about 91,000 survived to become prisoners of war. The rest had died in combat, from starvation, from cold, from disease. They had died in cellars and in makeshift hospitals and on the frozen steppe, trying to hold a perimeter that was shrinking every day. Some had died as soldiers, fighting. Others had died simply because the human body, subjected to enough deprivation and cold, stops working. Of the odd 1,000 who were taken prisoner, fewer than 6,000 would ever return to Germany. Most died in Soviet prisoner of war camps from the same deprivations, the same cold, the same hunger that had defined the final months of the battle. The last German prisoners of Stalingrad were not released until 1955, 10 years after the war ended. On the Soviet side, the numbers are staggering in a different way. Total Soviet military casualties at Stalingrad, killed, wounded, captured, missing, are estimated at over 1.1 million. Those are the soldiers. The civilian casualties are harder to calculate, beginning with the bombing of August 23, 1942, and compounding across 6 months of urban warfare. Estimates range widely, but the deaths numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Total casualties of the Battle of Stalingrad, all sides, military and civilian, across the full duration of the engagement, are generally estimated at between 1.7 and 2 million people. 2 million people. The number is so large that it becomes almost meaningless without effort. It is more than the entire population of many modern capital cities. It is a figure that strains the imagination's capacity to attach meaning to loss. You can say it and not feel it. You have to work at it. You have to think about what it means that 2 million people were killed or so severely wounded that their lives were fundamentally altered in a battle that lasted roughly 6 months, in and around a city on the western bank of the Volga River. For Germany, Stalingrad was more than a defeat. It was the moment when the war changed. Before Stalingrad, Germany had never suffered a major defeat on the Eastern Front. The Wehrmacht had retreated, had suffered setbacks, had endured the shock of the first Russian winter, but it had not been broken. After Stalingrad, the world could see that the German army could be not merely stopped, but encircled, starved, and forced to surrender. The myth of German military invincibility, a myth that had been critical to Germany's diplomatic position and to the morale of its population, had been shattered. The propaganda ministry under Goebbels worked furiously to manage the news. Radio broadcasts were interrupted. Official communication spoke of heroic sacrifice and Fortress Stalingrad. But the reality could not be hidden entirely. There were 91,000 prisoners, and their existence, visible, documented, broadcast by Soviet radio, was irrefutable evidence of what had happened. Hitler declared 3 days of national mourning. In the streets of German cities, people understood, even without being told everything, that something fundamental had changed. For the Soviet Union, Stalingrad was a transformation, not an easy one. The war had years and millions more deaths ahead of it, but a psychological and strategic turning point. The Soviet military had demonstrated that it could plan and execute a large-scale operation with real sophistication. Generals like Zhukov and Vasilevsky and Rokossovsky had shown they understood how to think at the operational level, how to deceive, how to mass force, how to time a blow for maximum effect. The men who had survived Stalingrad in the rubble, on the Volga crossing boats, in the cauldron, had proven something about what human beings can withstand. This is not a celebration. It is an observation that comes with a deep cost. The price of that proof was measured in frozen limbs and empty stomachs, and minds permanently altered by what they had seen and done. General Vasily Chuikov, who had commanded the 62nd Army inside the city for the entirety of the defense, emerged from Stalingrad as one of the most respected officers in the Soviet military. When he died decades later in 1982, he was buried, at his own request, on Mamayev Kurgan, the hill that had been the site of the bitterest fighting throughout the battle. He wanted to be among his soldiers. Mamayev Kurgan is today the site of the Motherland Calls Memorial, a massive statue of a woman, sword raised, visible from enormous distances, presiding over the city now called Volgograd. It is one of the largest statues in the world. It stands not in triumph exactly, but in witness, as if something that large is needed just to hold the weight of what happened below it. Conclusion. What Stalingrad means, it is tempting, looking back, to reach for grand conclusions. To say that Stalingrad was the turning point of the Second World War, the moment the tide turned and Germany's defeat became inevitable. Historians debate this. There are those who point to other battles, other moments, other turning points. But there is something true in the instinct. Stalingrad was where the German army lost its belief in its own invincibility. Stalingrad was where the Soviet military found out what it was capable of. And Stalingrad was where the world, looking at the ruins and the prisoner counts and the casualty figures, understood that this war was going to be long and terrible, and leave marks on the civilization that fought it that would not easily fade. But perhaps the most important thing about Stalingrad is not what it decided, or what it proved, or what it changed. It is this, that somewhere in the ruins of that city, in the winter of 1942 and 1943, there were ordinary people, young men from Germany and Russia and Romania and Italy, from cities and farms, from families who were waiting for letters. And they were given a situation that no human being should ever be given. A situation designed to break them. A situation that stripped away everything except the most basic facts of physical existence: warmth, food, the next moment. And in that situation, they did what people do in such situations. Some of them found extraordinary reserves of courage or endurance or compassion. Some of them broke. Some of them did things they could never speak of afterward. Most of them simply tried to survive 1 hour at a time in circumstances that made survival feel like an act of absurdity. The men who made the decisions that put them there, Hitler in his headquarters, Stalin in the Kremlin, the generals and the staff officers with their maps, looked at Stalingrad as a piece in a larger game. They looked at it in terms of flanks and objectives and strategic value and symbolic weight. The men on the ground looked at it in terms of the next room. History tends to remember Stalingrad as a battle, as a turning point, as a statistic: 2 million casualties, 6 months, this many kilometers of contested ground, and it was all of those things. But it was also this, a place where men were cold and hungry and frightened and far from anyone who loved them, and where they died in numbers that the human mind cannot truly absorb. For reasons that were decided by people with titles and offices, and the kind of power that transforms individual human beings into abstractions. Every number in the casualty count was a person. Every person had a name. We do not know all the names. We cannot. There were too many of them, and too many died in places where no one was writing anything down, in moments too small for history to record. But they were there, in the cold and the rubble and the silence between the gunfire. They were there. And that is what Stalingrad was,